What if everything you thought was heartbreak was actually a chain reaction of choices quietly destroying a life in slow motion, and the proof just surfaced at the worst possible moment?
And this is now becoming a real crisis.
Harry was not in love with Meghan Markle. He was in love with somebody else who turned him down.
When you look at the one who got away, and she's living the life that you hope to live one day, in Mystique no less, with a lovely man who treats her very well, of course that is going to hurt.
I don't think that Harry would ever leave those children. And so he's stuck in California and he doesn't have any friends, really. You know, Nacho is there sometimes, but he also lives in Florida and he's constantly traveling. He hangs out with his security guards and Meghan and the kids.
Harry has woken up and smelled the roses. And he's not happy because it's not roses he's smelling. He's smelling something bad. Who?
March 30th, 2026. One image. One silent explosion. Chelsy Davy standing on a beach in Mauritius, sunlight wrapping around her like a quiet victory, holding her third child, Finn. No cameras, no strategy, no performance, just peace. And in that same exact week, across an ocean and a lifetime away, Prince Harry sits in a London courtroom, not holding a baby, but gripping onto a war that refuses to end. Not building a future, but dissecting a past. And then suddenly, messages, private messages, the kind he said didn't exist, the kind that whisper contradictions, sugar, movie snuggles, words that don't just speak, they expose.
Prince Harry is heartbroken all over again. Now, of course, this is something that he is never going to admit publicly, especially as his marriage to Meghan Markle crumbles.
And right there, in that single week, everything cracks open, because this was never about whether he misses her. That's the surface story. The real story? How does a man lose everything while thinking he's fighting for it? How do you walk away from love, stability, purpose, and end up chasing ghosts in a courtroom? Piece by piece, decision by decision, the people who grounded him disappear, not all at once. Slowly, quietly, until there's no one left to tell him to stop.
Diana looked after him like a child. He was a child, but she had to really nurse him and hold him, and he was a damaged child from the start.
And here's the detail that doesn't sit right, the one that lingers in the back of your mind like something unfinished. Chelsy didn't just move on, she built his dream, the exact life he described over and over again. Africa. Privacy, children, no cameras. She got it. And what did he get? Montecito, lawsuits, and a marriage that the entire world is quietly counting down.
If there was a willing billionaire, she would only leave for a step up.
She saw it before anyone else did, long before Meghan Markle even entered the picture. Chelsy looked at royal life and didn't hesitate. Too crazy, too uncomfortable. That wasn't fear, that was clarity. And she didn't just say it, she built her life around escaping it. That's what makes this different. She didn't lose him. She chose not to stay.
Yeah, he loved her a lot, and she really loved him, and they had great fun together. And he liked it because she wasn't worried about the royal family. That wasn't a big deal for her. She just fitted in very easily.
Go back further. 2004, Cape Town. A young prince meets a woman who doesn't need the crown. 7 years of on and off. She moved countries, studied law, met the queen, attended royal weddings. She tried, really tried, but there was always a wall, and it wasn't just the press, it was everything that came with him. The pressure, the chaos, and yes, his own mistakes, affairs, distance, silence. Even he admits it, 100% his fault. But then comes the twist that flips everything. He blames the press for destroying what they had. Yet the woman at the center of it all, she walked away from the entire system, not just the headlines. And this is where the contrast becomes almost unbearable, because while he stayed trapped in the narrative, she disappeared into something real. Law degree, elite firm. Then she pivoted, gemology, building a jewelry brand from ethical African stones, crafting a life from scratch. Marriage, children, Mauritius. No interviews, no victim story, just silence and success. A quiet life so complete it doesn't need to prove anything. Meanwhile, he keeps talking, keeps fighting, keeps circling the same battles as if resolution is always just one more lawsuit away. Now pause, really pause, because what happens next doesn't feel like coincidence anymore. It feels like a pattern. Friends who question things, gone. Close allies cut off. A circle shrinking until only one voice remains loud enough to guide decide everything, not debated, not challenged, just followed. And suddenly, the man who once had an entire institution behind him is standing alone, telling the world his father won't take his calls. And here's the unsettling part. When someone starts losing every connection they once had, is it bad luck or is it design? Because one by one, the people who knew him longest disappeared. Not loudly, not dramatically, just removed. And in their place, a new reality, a new narrative, a new direction that somehow leads him further and further away from everything he once said he wanted. And maybe that's the real question no one wants to ask out loud. Was this transformation accidental or inevitable? And just when you think the story has already unraveled, the real damage begins to surface. Not in whispers, not in rumors, but in cold, documented evidence that doesn't blink, doesn't bend, and doesn't forget. Because while that image of Chelsy Davy holding her child lingers like a quiet answer to a life question, the reality for Prince Harry shifts from emotional to irreversible. The courtroom becomes more than a legal battle. It becomes a stage where contradictions start colliding with truth, and not softly, violently. His entire case, the foundation of years of lawsuits, rests on one central claim: that the press invaded his life through illegal means, that they destroyed his relationships, that they forced him into isolation. And for a moment, it seemed like he was winning. Victories against major media groups, millions in settlements, apologies printed in black and white. It looked like justice was finally catching up, until the one thing he didn't expect surfaced at the worst possible time. Because in court, under oath, details matter. Words matter. And when you say something didn't happen, you're not just speaking, you're locking yourself into a version of reality that cannot change. He said he met that journalist once. He said he cut off contact immediately. He said he wasn't friends with journalists. Clear, direct, absolute. But then came the messages. Not rumors, not speculation. Actual messages. Conversations stretched across weeks. Familiar, flirtatious, personal. Words like sugar, late night calls, private numbers exchanged, miss our movie snuggles. That one line alone doesn't just raise eyebrows, it detonates the entire narrative. Because suddenly, the story he told and the evidence presented don't match. And when that happens in court, it's not just awkward, it's devastating. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. Not because of what he said, but because of what it implies. If one part of the story isn't true, what else isn't? If the press didn't need illegal methods to get close to him, then what exactly has he been fighting all this time? Because the case was never just about privacy. It was about blame. It was about pointing to a villain. But what happens when the villain doesn't fit anymore? And while all of this unfolds publicly, something else is happening quietly in the background, a slow collapse that doesn't make noise until you look closely. Deals that once looked like golden bridges, disappearing. Spotify, gone. Netflix, restructured. Publishing deals fading into silence. And not in dramatic explosions, but in quiet exits that feel even more final, even more deliberate. Because when companies walk away, they don't announce failure, they just stop believing. And then the numbers start telling a story no interview ever could. Millions earned, yes, but millions spent. Security costs stacking year after year. Legal fees climbing into the tens of millions. A lifestyle that requires constant input, constant relevance, constant momentum. And when the momentum slows, the pressure doesn't. It builds. Meanwhile, the circle around them keeps shrinking. Staff leaving, advisors disappearing, familiar faces replaced by new ones who don't stay long enough to matter. And when turnover becomes a pattern, it stops being coincidence. It becomes a signal. But the most unsettling detail isn't financial. It's time, because there's a date quietly approaching that no one can ignore. May 19th, 2028. 10 years of marriage. And under California law, that line changes everything. Not emotionally, legally, permanently. Because once that threshold is crossed, the rules shift. Support becomes open-ended. Financial ties become harder to break. And suddenly, a relationship isn't just personal anymore, it's structural, locked in ways that don't unravel easily. And here's the tension no one wants to say out loud. Every rumor, every whisper, every analysis seems to orbit around that one date. Not because something has happened, but because of what could. Now, layer that onto everything else. The isolation, the lawsuits, the contradictions, the disappearing deals, the public perception shifting slowly but steadily. And then place it next to that image again, Chelsy on a beach holding her child, living the exact life he once described in his own words. No strategy, no damage control, just reality. And suddenly, the story doesn't feel like gossip anymore. It feels like a parallel universe, one where a single decision splits into two completely different lives, one moving toward simplicity, the other toward complexity so deep deep it becomes impossible to untangle. Even the comparisons being whispered now carry weight. Not dramatic, not exaggerated, historical. Edward VIII gave up everything for love and spent the rest of his life in exile asking a question no one could answer. Was it worth it? Different time, different world, but the emotional blueprint feels strangely familiar. A man stepping away from everything he knew only to find himself searching for something that never quite settles. And maybe that's the real ending that isn't an ending at all, because this story hasn't closed. It hasn't resolved. It hasn't even slowed down. It's still moving, still shifting, still revealing pieces one by one. The court ruling hasn't arrived yet. The financial trajectory hasn't stabilized. The relationships haven't healed. And that date is still getting closer. So now the question isn't what happened. That part is already written in fragments across court records, interviews, and silence. The real question is what happens next. Because somewhere between a courtroom in London and a quiet beach in Mauritius, two versions of the same life are still unfolding, and only one of them looks like peace.